Why did the dog not blink when the room turned against him? Boots scraped concrete. Laughter drifted in tired, careless waves. A day of drills was ending, the kind of day where adrenaline fades into joking voices and loosened vests, the kind where danger feels distant again. And yet he sat perfectly still. Not because he was afraid, not because he was tired, but because he was waiting. Across the sun-baked training yard, between scuffed boundary lines and scattered shell casings, a woman stood beside him. She did not shift her weight, did not glance at the clock, did not speak. Her presence was quiet but not small. Her sleeves were rolled once. Her plate carrier had no name patch, no rank, no story stitched onto her chest. The leash was wrapped once around her wrist, not tight, not loose, held like something you only touch when you are prepared for what might follow. The dog was lean, black-coated, muscles drawn tight beneath the harness, a shepherd mix maybe, but his stillness felt wrong, too controlled, too deliberate, like a machine that chose silence instead of sleep. A SEAL platoon crossed the yard in a loose wave of confidence. 14 men who had just rotated home, laughter still hanging in their throats, dust still clinging to their boots. One of them slowed. "Hey," he murmured, "that dog hasn't moved once." Another glanced over, eval support. "No idea," the sergeant replied, squinting, "but that stillness isn't normal." They had worked with dogs before. They knew barking, they knew packing, they knew tension. This was none of those things. The woman did not look at them. The dog did not look away. A junior operator muttered something about museum statues. A few chuckled. The sound felt too loud, too careless for the space they were standing in. And somehow, that was the moment the air began to shift. Because when silence refuses to answer noise, it makes men uneasy. One of them drifted closer. Not hostile, just curious. Another circled wide. Another crouched low, pretending to retie his boot. The dog did not track them with his eyes. He tracked their breath. The woman spoke for the first time. "Please don't crowd him." Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. Someone smiled. "He's fine, doesn't even flinch." "He isn't trained to perform," she replied. "He's trained to respond." They laughed again, softer now, less sure. "What's his name?" someone asked. "Call sign is Valor." A pause. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Valor's head turned slightly, not toward the voice, but toward the shift of weight in the man's stance, toward the pressure change in the concrete, toward the quiet truth his body was already revealing. The woman didn't raise her voice. "You're assuming he's trained like a dog," she said. "He's not." The circle tightened. 6 men now. Breath slow. Movements subtle. Instinctive. The kind of quiet dance men do when they've survived too much to notice they're still testing the world. One stepped closer. Then another. The woman didn't move. "Down," she said softly. Valor did not move. A chuckle rippled through the group. "I didn't say it for him," she said. "I said it for you." That was when the room truly began to feel smaller. Another step forward. A boot scraped concrete. Valor's breathing changed, deeper now, controlled, measured. His muscles did not bunch. They set like locks sliding into place. "If you cross the line," the woman said quietly, "he will respond." Someone laughed, nervous, sharp. "I'm not threatening you," she added. "I'm informing you." A young operator, confident, still riding the edge of his last deployment, stepped in from behind. Just curiosity. Just space testing. That was all it took. The first second belonged to him. The second did not. Valor did not bark. Did not snarl. Did not lunge. He moved sideways surgically, cutting across the man's center line, using compact force and perfect timing. A body hit concrete. Not loud, just final. No bite, only control. 4 paws pressed into a chest, breath tracked, muscles countered, a muzzle dipped not to tear but to remind. A vibration hummed beneath the skin. The yard froze. Not in fear, in understanding. The woman raised her voice only once. Release. Valor stepped back like nothing had happened. The man lay blinking at the sky. The laughter did not return, because some lessons don't arrive with noise. They arrive with silence, and silence stays longer. She walked back to her place. Valor sat beside her, breathing slow, watching nothing, watching everything. I warned you, she said softly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did she hesitate before answering the question that everyone else avoided? The silence after the fall lingered longer than it should have. Boots didn't move. No one joked. Even the wind felt like it was waiting for permission to breathe again. The young operator who had been taken down slowly sat up, rubbing his ribs. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't embarrassed. It was unsettled, the expression men wear when something rewrites what they thought they understood about control. The woman stepped forward and offered her hand. You okay? She asked. He took it carefully, like the ground itself might still be uncertain. Yeah, he said, I think so. She nodded once and returned to Valor's side. The leash settled back around her wrist, not as restraint, but as connection. Someone finally exhaled. What is he trained for? The platoon sergeant asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't hear, but because this wasn't a question you answered casually. Not with jokes still in the air. Not with adrenaline still fatting from skin. Close quarters interdiction, she said at last. Silent neutralization, independent decision window. The words didn't sound dangerous. They sounded final. Another voice broke in, independent. In certain environments, she replied, if I'm compromised, valor acts. The man who'd been dropped rubbed his chest again. He moved before I even finished shifting my weight. He moved when your body crossed its intent threshold. A pause. How can a dog read intent? He doesn't read hands, she said. He reads hips, breath, pressure, chemical change, adrenaline spikes, micro-hesitation. Silence returned, but it felt different now. Not awkward, reflective. Someone finally asked the question. Everyone else felt pressing into their ribs. Where did he learn that? She looked away, not from discomfort, but from memory. From men who didn't come home. The words weren't heavy. They were honest. Valor remained still beside her, ears relaxed, tail low, like he didn't carry a history carved into his nervous system by loss. But he did. He wasn't meant to be reassigned, she continued. He was supposed to be retired, shelved. They said he was too intense, too sensory-driven, said he wouldn't hesitate when humans did. Her fingers brushed the side of his harness, a small motion, almost unconscious. They weren't wrong, she added. They just didn't understand what that meant. The sergeant stepped closer now, slower than before. Where did you come into this? She met his eyes. I was the last handler on the qualification list trained in cross-signal interpretation and independent CQB control. Everyone else had rotated out. They called me because no one else wanted him. Why not? Because he doesn't obey fear, she said. He obeys clarity. The words sat in the air like smoke. She took a breath before continuing. 2 years ago, his original unit hit a compound in eastern Nangarhar. Bad intel, wrong map, wrong timing. First entry team took contact in under 15 seconds. His handler was hit clearing the left breach. No one spoke. Valor was already inside. Her voice didn't shake, but something in it had been hollowed by time. He cleared the corner without command, neutralized a flanker, prevented a secondary ambush. No bark, no sound, the op stayed quiet. 6 men walked out who shouldn't have. Another breath. They tried to shelve him after that, said he disobeyed, said he was unstable. Unstable, someone muttered. She nodded once. They don't like assets that make their own decisions. The room felt smaller again. I took him, she said, not to fix him, not to control him, just to make sure he wasn't alone. Valor's head tilted slightly, not toward her, but toward the cadence of her voice, the rhythm he had learned to anchor himself to. They didn't realize it then, but this was the real test. Not of the dog, of themselves. Because every man in that yard had lived through hesitation, through broken orders, through intel that arrived too late or wrong. They had all seen what waiting could cost. And now they were standing beside something that didn't wait for permission to protect life. The sergeant finally spoke. "Kill House 4 is open." She didn't react. "Blank loadout," he continued. "Minimal lights, we observe he works." She nodded. "Anyone who enters does so as non-participant," she said. "You don't speak. You don't signal. He reads the room, not commands." 20 minutes later, they stood before the darkened structure. Valor didn't wear armor, just his harness. His presence felt lighter but somehow more dangerous without visible protection. The leash unclipped. "Work," she whispered. Valor moved not fast but purposefully, low, quiet, like gravity had chosen him as its favorite child. On the feed, they watched him step through angled frames without touching them, pause where shadow lied unnaturally, lift a paw, a silent alert, at a target that hadn't made a sound. "He smelled the latex," she said quietly through the comms, "only synthetic in the room." He pivoted through corners, cleared 3 sightlines with one arc of movement, froze in darkness. Then he lay down. "That's his shutdown cue," she whispered. "False intel environment. He pauses until recon confirms." No one spoke. Because in that moment, they weren't watching a dog. They were watching restraint. And restraint is rarer than force. When the lights came back on, no one applauded, no one joked. Because something in them had shifted, and they didn't have language for it yet. Keller finally whispered, "Why bring him here?" She looked down at Valor, then back at them. "Because you think control makes you safe," she said gently. "But trust keeps you alive." Valor lifted his head. He was waiting. Sometimes the strongest guardians are the ones who refuse to move until the truth arrives. And sometimes the bravest loyalty doesn't bark. It listens. Why did the room feel heavier after the lights came back on, like something unseen had entered and refused to leave? No one rushed to speak. No one rushed to move. Valor sat beside her as if the kill house had been nothing more than another hallway, another quiet decision, another moment where he had chosen restraint over reaction. But the men in that observation room weren't the same ones who had walked in. They had expected a performance. They had witnessed a judgment. The sergeant finally cleared his throat. "Who trained him?" She didn't look at Valor when she answered. "Retired chief out of Little Creek," she said. "Final year instructor for advanced handler tactics. He once told me Valor didn't need to be broken in. He just needed to be respected." Someone leaned back in their chair, processing. So why was he shelved? Her eyes dropped this time, not to avoid the question, but because the answer lived somewhere deeper than words like to travel. Because he disobeyed once. A few brows lifted. He broke protocol in Mazari Sharif. Command said he compromised the op. "Did he?" the sergeant asked quietly. She shook her head. "He saved 6 men, prevented the op from going loud, and exposed a double agent who'd been embedded for 2 years. Silence fell again. They didn't want to say that, she continued, because then they would have to admit he was right. Valor shifted slightly, not from restlessness, but from awareness, like a current had changed direction beneath him. He's never missed a track, she added, never misread intent, never engaged without proof. Another voice from the back asked what everyone was now thinking. So what does he do when he's not working? She looked at Valor, really looked at him, the scar on his left shoulder, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the stillness that came not from discipline but from memory. He waits, she said. One word. Heavy. Because waiting isn't passive when you've learned what hesitation can cost. The sergeant stood slowly. His boots echoed too loudly in the quiet room as he walked over and knelt beside Valor. He didn't speak. He simply held out his palm. Valor leaned forward, sniffed once, then rested his head gently in the man's hand. No one breathed. It wasn't submission. It was permission. A quiet acknowledgement between two warriors who had both learned what loss feels like. Keller swallowed. Guess the master class wasn't for us to watch. A pause. It was to learn. The men filed out quietly after that, not with noise, not with jokes, but with nods the kind men give when something inside them shifts and they don't yet know how to explain it. Only the commanding officer remained. He leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Valor like he was seeing him for the first time. Off the record, he said finally, what else can he do? She hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because this truth carried consequences. He's trained to move through enemy encampments without sound, she said quietly. Clear rooms faster than thermal can map, recognize booby traps, disarm where applicable. The Co's brow furrowed. But that's not what makes him dangerous. What does, he asked. She stepped closer now, her voice almost reverent. He waits until there's no doubt. He refuses to engage unless danger is confirmed at 100%. The Co exhaled slowly, so he never misfires. No, she said, he prevents them. A beat passed. He was classified Tier 1. The room seemed to tilt. He had black file clearance, she added. Solo confirmation authorization, recovery asset listing. And they shelved him. They called him a liability. She knelt beside Valor, running her fingers once behind his ears, gentle, familiar. They didn't say his disobedience saved 6 men. They didn't say he kept an operation silent. They didn't say he exposed a traitor. The Co watched them both. Would you deploy with him again? He asked. Anywhere, she replied. Another pause. Then he nodded once. That's all I needed to know. He turned toward the door. His record will be reactivated, he said. Officially, this night never happened. The door clicked shut behind him. And something old stirred in the room, not pride, not fear, but a sense of unfinished purpose. Valor lifted his head slightly. He was listening. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive with forgiveness. It arrives with permission. And the ones who carry the deepest scars are often the ones who guard the quietest doors. Why did the runway lights flicker on before the sun was ready to rise? They came on in slow sequence, one bulb chasing the next like a trail meant for ghosts. She stood at the open ramp of the transport aircraft with the cold morning air sliding through her sleeves. Valor sat beside her. No armor this time, no vest, just fur catching the wind, ears twitching at sounds only he could hear. The night had stripped the bass of noise. Even the engines felt respectful in their idling, like they were waiting for permission. Across the tarmac, Keller leaned against a Humvee, arms crossed. He hadn't spoken since the debrief, but when she met his eyes, he nodded, not in challenge, not in doubt, in understanding. The others stayed back. Not by order. By instinct. Valor had earned that distance. "Ready?" she asked softly. He stood. That was his answer. They walked toward the aircraft together. Not rushed. Not slow. Just steady, one pace apart, shoulders aligned like two lives that had already agreed on direction. A shadow shifted beneath the wing. The commanding officer stepped forward. No clipboard, no ceremony, just an envelope in his hand. "Not orders," he said. "Recommendation might help." She opened it. Two words stared back at her from the government letterhead. "Voluntary reinstatement." She looked up. "Wherever you go next," the co added, "don't go quiet. We've got too many ghosts already." She didn't promise anything. She simply nodded. Because promises feel different when you've already buried people. She tucked the envelope under her arm and turned back toward the ramp. Valor was already waiting. Inside the aircraft, the lights were dim. The walls hummed with distant readiness, the kind of hum that exists before things change. She paused at the threshold. Just one breath. Just 1 second. Then they stepped inside. The door began to rise behind them like a curtain closing on a story no one was meant to watch. The engines spooled up. The runway lights reflected off the metal belly of the plane like memories trying to keep up. And somewhere, deep inside the files no one reads, the name Valor was reclassified. But not forgotten. Not this time. Not again. Because for every name carved into a wall, there is a story that never got told. And this one was still breathing. Inside the aircraft, she took the seat across from him and finally allowed her shoulders to sink. Fatigue crept in not from hours, but from years. Valor lay down at her boots. She watched his chest rise slowly, steadily, like a promise that didn't need to be spoken. For the first time since she'd taken his leash, she let herself feel something close to hope. And hope is dangerous because it asks you to imagine tomorrow. She had learned to survive by staying in today. But something about the way Valor waited, the way he trusted stillness, made tomorrow feel possible. Her eyes drifted shut. Memories surfaced. Hands she had once held. Voices she still heard in sleep. The echo of a handler she never met, the one who had first taught Valor what hesitation costs. She whispered softly, not to the dog but to the past. "I didn't forget you." Valor's ear twitched. He always listened. And sometimes, the quietest soldiers are the ones who carry the loudest histories. What did she fear more, the mission ahead, or the memories that never stayed behind? The aircraft lifted through low cloud, like it was pushing through something that didn't want to let go. Below them, the lights of the base shrank into nothing. Another quiet place fading into another memory, another piece of earth learning how to forget. She sat upright, hands folded, eyes open but unfocused. Valor lay at her boots, breathing slow, the only steady thing in a cabin full of vibration and unseen destinations. She had learned not to name fear. You can't fight what you name too often. But tonight, it was close, sitting in her chest like something that hadn't been invited but knew it belonged there anyway. She reached down and rested her fingers lightly against Valor's shoulder. "Hey," she whispered. His tail thumped once, soft, reassuring, like he was reminding her that presence was more powerful than promises. She leaned her head back and finally let the memories come. They always came at altitude. She remembered the call, the one that had dragged her out of a quiet rotation into a classified hangar full of men who wouldn't meet her eyes. They had said his name like it was already a problem. Too intense. Too independent. Too unpredictable. They had said it the way people describe something they're afraid to understand. She had asked one question. Does he save lives? The room had gone quiet. That had been answer enough. The first time she met Valor, he hadn't barked. He hadn't moved. He had simply watched her, the way dogs do when they're deciding what kind of human you are. She hadn't rushed him, hadn't reached. She had sat down on the concrete and waited. Minutes passed. Then his tail had moved once. Not excitement. Acceptance. She had never felt chosen before that moment. Not by a unit. Not by command. Not by fate. But that dog had chosen her. And that had changed the way she carried everything. The aircraft dipped slightly. Valor's ears lifted, then settled again. Always reading, always calculating. She knew his calm was learned, not natural. 8 handlers before her. 6 dead. 2 retired. Every voice still living inside him. Every hesitation catalogued. He had learned what it costs to wait for certainty that never comes. She swallowed. They had called him unstable. But what they really meant was uncontrollable. They feared a guardian who didn't need permission to protect. And she had been tired of watching people die while waiting for clearance. Her jaw tightened. "I won't make you wait," she murmured. Valor shifted closer, pressing his head lightly against her shin. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. To remember. She remembered the day she almost didn't make it back, pinned behind a collapsed stairwell, radio dead, dust choking the air. She remembered thinking about nothing except how quiet it was about to become. And then breath. Not hers. His. He had found her without a command, without a signal, just instinct and memory and something deeper than protocol. He had waited until he was sure. Then he had moved. She was alive because he did. The aircraft leveled. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. They would land soon. Another place, another unknown. Another room waiting to be read. She looked down at Valor. "Whatever they ask of us," she whispered, "we do it clean." His eyes lifted to hers. Not obedience. Agreement. Because sometimes loyalty doesn't kneel. It walks beside you. Why did she feel calmer stepping into the unknown than she ever had standing in safety? The transport touched down before sunrise, the kind of landing that feels more like a promise than a sound. Wheels kissed the runway, engines sighed, and for a moment the world held its breath. She stood first. Valor rose beside her, not hurried, not hesitant, just ready. The ramp lowered slowly, spilling pale light across concrete that still smelled like yesterday's heat. No banners, no greetings, just wind, distant machinery, and the quiet knowledge that somewhere beyond the perimeter, something was already waiting to be understood. She paused at the edge of the ramp. Not because she doubted, but because she always honored the moment before change. Valor's ears twitched. He was already reading the day, pressure in the air, vibrations in the ground, the faint chemical language of people who didn't know they were being measured yet. She exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. They stepped forward together. Inside the compound, the silence felt different, not empty, alert, like a held breath waiting to see if it could finally relax. A junior officer approached, clipboard tight against his chest. "You're cleared to proceed to holding," he said, "briefing in 30. She nodded. Valor didn't look at him. He looked beyond him. They walked. Boots echoed once, then faded. Their shadows stretched long in the early light, and for a brief moment she felt the weight of every handler Valor had ever known walking with them. Not behind. Not above. With him. At the holding bay, she knelt and rested her forehead briefly against his. "You still waiting?" she murmured. His tail thumped once. "Yes." But not like before. Now he waited with her, Not alone, not shelved, not forgotten. The room began to fill, voices low, radios murmuring, plans stacking themselves into possibility. She didn't listen yet. She watched Valor, watched the calm in his breathing, the clarity in his stillness. Because she had learned something the others were only beginning to understand. That restraint is not weakness. That silence is not absence. That some guardians don't need applause, only trust. And somewhere far away, on walls carved with names, the ghosts of those who trained him stood quietly at attention, not in mourning but in peace. Because the one they taught to wait had finally been allowed to walk forward. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the bravest loyalty doesn't bark. It listens.